After 1,001 days of war, Ukraine says it will never submit to Russian occupiers while Moscow approves the use of nuclear weapons. Firing American-made long-range missiles into Russia for the first time, Kiev is stepping up its defense at what could be a frightening cost. As the U.S. approves Ukraine's use of more American weapons, President Putin greenlights using nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states. After almost 3 years, is this conflict entering a dangerous new phase? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the war in Ukraine. To mark the 1,000th day of conflict between Russia and Ukraine, each side again vowed to defeat the other. That wasn't where most of the world hoped the two would be at this point, signifying no clear end to a war that's now escalating toward the use of nuclear weapons. The U.S. has not only given Kiev permission to use American missiles on Russian soil, it's also approved anti-personnel mines. And for Moscow, that reconfirms their argument that NATO has actually entered the war, clearing the way for Russian nuclear weapons to be used on Ukraine. So is this just rhetoric, or has the conflict just taken a highly volatile step toward a wider war? Here's a look.
The Russia-Ukraine war is entering a dangerous new phase. On Monday night, Kiev launched its most contentious strikes yet, hitting deep into Russian territory with US-supplied ATACMS missiles. Moscow has warned this escalation could have dire consequences. The strikes, which targeted ammunition depots and critical infrastructure, have rattled the Kremlin.
The fact that ATACMS was used repeatedly in the Bryansk region tonight, of course it is a signal that they want to escalate the conflict. And it is impossible to use these high-tech missiles without the Americans. Putin has said this many times.
On the same day, Russia responded by lowering the threshold for its nuclear doctrine. President Putin now reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a broader range of conventional attacks on its territory. And the escalation doesn't stop there. Moscow has received reinforcements. It's expected that there are now at least 10,000 North Korean troops in Russia preparing to help retake territory in the Kursk region lost to Ukraine in August.
It has been confirmed that about 11,000 North Korean troops were moved and deployed to Kursk around late October after completing on-site adaptation training in northeastern Russia. It is confirmed that they are currently deployed to Russia's Airborne Brigade or Marines to receive tactical training and drone response training, and some have participated in the war.
This could open the door for a broader offensive, stretching Ukraine's already fragile defenses in the eastern Donbas region. And then there's Donald Trump. His inauguration in January has Kyiv trying to guess what comes next. Trump has promised to end the war quickly, which could mean cutting aid to Ukraine unless it cedes occupied territories.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office shortly after we win the presidency, we win, all of us together are going to win, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. I know them both. I will get it settled.
And Europe faces a critical choice. Will it step up military and financial support to fill the gap if the US steps back? Or will it risk leaving Ukraine to face Russia alone in a war it's bound to lose? From missiles to reinforcements and now nuclear posturing, Ukraine's fight is far from over. With shifting alliances and global stakes, the more than 1,000-day war is barreling towards a very uncertain and dangerous future.
Now, on Wednesday, the U.S. and several European embassies in Kiev closed due to threats of a significant attack. And China's foreign ministry stepped in, asking Russia to exercise restraint and calm. So are we witnessing a real escalation or more of the saber-rattling and rhetoric that's characterized much of the last 3 years? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Kiev, Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, Peter Zalmayev, From Moscow, former Russian diplomat Vyacheslav Matuzov, and from Washington, Eurasia political analyst Jason J. Smart. Thanks all so much for being with me. Peter, I'll begin with you because you are obviously in Ukraine. Your military is saying now that it has, one, repelled a Russian air attack on Kiev, but you have embassies closing. You have Russia threatening to go nuclear again. So how seriously are you taking all of this right now? Does it feel like something is on the precipice?
Well, the Kremlin certainly wants to feel that something is on the precipice. You know, I don't think we're feeling anything that would be substantially different from everything we've experienced so far. Vladimir Putin is once again using nuclear blackmail to try to ward off anyone and everyone who wants to continue supporting Ukraine. I believe that, once again, as evidence that this is part, for the course and much of the same, is Vladimir Putin really does not need any sort of official change to the nuclear doctrine. He rules his country by diktat, by fiat. He doesn't need any of this. This is obviously a message for the outside world. Once again, Ukraine had been in the business of hitting Russian targets deep inside Russia's territory for quite some time using its own locally produced drones, and that hasn't set off any of these recent threats. So why now? You see, so a lot is very unclear. But once again, I would caution against falling prey all too easily to Putin's, renewed nuclear blackmail.
Okay, let me ask Vyacheslav, if that's what you think it is it nuclear blackmail? I mean, would Russia really employ its nuclear arsenal in this war?
Well, I don't think that Russian-American relations will develop in future and in the near future and after arriving to the presidency, Donald Trump will be endangered by the using by Russia any threats, any not nuclear only, but also for outside military program that is proclaimed today. So I don't think that Russia will ignore international law. First of all, that all this Russian doctrine on nuclear the doctrine is restricted by international law and their obligations to the United Nations Declaration and to our relations with the West as a whole. I don't think that this is joke about the nuclear bomb. It is not nowadays. I have any reasons. Russia begins using such kind of weapon of mass destruction. I exclude it absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me ask Jason what you think. I mean, how concerned are you? And do you think it was actually necessary to close the embassies that have shut down?
Well, I think that the embassies were closed not due to fear of a nuclear strike, closed simply due to the fact that it's probably going to be a large strike of Shaheeds, the Iranian drones, as well as with missiles that Russia typically fires on Ukraine, including Kiev, and is used to kill the civilian population around the country. So I think it was due to that, not nuclear. I don't think there's any serious chance that Russia would use nuclear weapons. I think that's about zero. So I can say I'm totally unconcerned by that.
It's interesting, though, because you're kind of saying then they're making sort of empty threats. But, we heard similar talk in the lead up to the invasion of Ukraine that Putin would never do that. He'd never go that far. And look where we are 3 years later.
Well, this is true. But the difference is that Vladimir Putin, during the course of this war, as well as his proxies, have said about 8 times they've used nuclear saber rattling. At no point have they actually used them or deployed the weapons beyond where they're usually kept. So it's very common for Russia to make these threats. It's not uncommon by any means. And they correctly understand that Western policymakers are very scared of those words. And so it's effective as the people like Jake Sullivan in the White House worry about escalation. But at the end of the day, I just see absolutely no evidence to think that anything will come of this. Russia would have far more to lose than to potentially gain, especially since its major allies, such as China, has said that it will not support Russia any longer should it use something like nuclear weapons.
Okay. I mean, Peter, does that give Ukrainians any sense of relief knowing that China, being the power that it is, has stepped up and said, hey, we're drawing this line as well?
Well, it has given Ukraine some relief all along, and this, as a matter of fact, happened during the summit in Uzbekistan, I believe the first summer of war, meaning the summer of 2022, the ancient city of Samarkand, and that's where Xi Jinping actually talked about extending security guarantees to members of the Central Asia community, countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and that was the one serious hint at that same meeting where Xi Jinping dropped about the use of nuclear weapons being completely out of the question, completely irresponsible. Andrea, I would actually add something to that point. While that is a relief, what is not a relief to Ukrainians is the fact that the incoming administration of the U.S. President, Donald Trump, may actually be using this recent nuclear rhetoric by Vladimir Putin as an excuse to try to bring Ukraine as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, to the negotiating table. Members of his team, including J.D. Vance and most recently Mike Waltz, who's been selected as his national security advisor, have actually said that, and criticized this decision as irresponsible. Donald Trump's son, Don Jr., called these people behind this decision at the administration, probably including President himself, Joe Biden, as imbeciles. I mean, you couldn't put it in any starker terms than that. So once again, folks at the Trump administration continue talking about trying to.
It seems we've lost Peter's connection. Let's try to rectify that, and we'll come back to him at a later point. Let me check in with Vyacheslav then, because picking up on what Peter was saying and the incoming Trump administration, President Trump has made a lot of how influential he can be and effectively finish this war, he's said, even within 24 hours. I mean, what is Russia making of that? How eager is Russian leadership to work with Donald Trump? And could he be just effectively underestimating really the complexity of this war in saying what he said?
Okay. Russia is not initiated any problems with the United States because Russian behavior, Russian decision to begin military action in Ukraine is based on their interest in preserve of national security. Because if national security will be guaranteed, I don't think that any other aspirations Russian command, Russian government, Russian president have. Because we don't have any intention to join Ukraine and spread Russian territory. No, it's not territorial question. It is a national security question. So I don't think
okay, but
that,
still, I mean, is Moscow interested in letting...
Even from China or even...
Is Moscow interested at all in letting President Trump lead the way, as he seems to have indicated he will do, as far as bringing peace to the region and ending the war is concerned?
Well, I don't see any other way to settle the situation in a peaceful manner and don't continue the killing on the battlefield between Ukrainian proxy of American political decision, American ammunition, American rockets, and proxy is Ukrainians who are fighting Russian military forces.
Okay.
I don't think that it will be continued very long. I don't think.
Okay. Peter, go ahead. I know you've been waiting to comment.
Yeah, I was starting to say this, but once again, the key players of the Trump administration, including J.D. Vance, including others, and most recently Mike Waltz, the incoming national security advisor, have said time and again that it's time to end this war. Donald Trump has said that. They're already commenting on this decision by Biden to allow Ukraine to use long-range attack systems as a bad decision, as a negative, as an escalatory decision. So that leads me to believe that there's some kind of a communication between the incoming administration of Donald Trump and Kremlin that goes back probably way before the actual election. And I suspect that Donald Trump, in his eagerness to be the peacemaker and also to follow up and make good on his promise to end the war within 24 hours, will actually try to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table as quickly as possible, which means under very unfavorable conditions for Ukraine, which would mean essentially a no to NATO for at least 20 years. That's being talked about. Recognizing new territorial realities, as Russia calls it, meaning recognizing Russia's land grabs, and finally reducing its army, standing army, to a symbolic figure of 70,000, essentially capitulating, essentially ceding sovereignty. That could be Donald Trump's plan. I hope it's not, but that is a concern in Ukraine.
Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't share those concerns. I've read those same statements. The fact is, we have to accept, just from the very beginning, that Russia is a poor, impoverished country. It is not taken seriously. Donald Trump does not respect it. Let's start with this. Despite his first term, he did try to seek better relations. Russia is a country that has no ability to do anything besides regional warfare, such as it's doing with its neighbor, which illegally invaded. Hence why Vladimir Putin is a wanted war criminal internationally and has arrest warrants for him. Aside from, kidnapping Ukrainian children and deporting them to Russia, Russia has no actual ability to pose a threat to a country such as the United States or to any NATO country. That's quite clear. And so at this point, I think what's going to go ahead is that Donald Trump surely will try to end this war. I think that he will find very quickly that the Russians are dishonest, as they've been dishonest brokers throughout this whole war. And when he finds that, I have no doubt that he will, as U.S. foreign policy would dictate, be happy to help Russia be thrown back to the Stone Age as it continues to cooperate with our enemies, such as North Korea, Iran, and China, and against Western civilization. Russia is a global threat. And increasingly, the American people and public polling recognize that. Fortunately, I think that this mistake of bringing North Koreans to go fight for Russia was a huge mistake. It shifted U.S. public opinion drastically. And so I think what's going to happen next is going to be something that will be in the best interest of the United States. And what is Russia's interest or non-interest is totally unimportant to everybody that's involved.
I mean, Jason, Russia doesn't really have interests beyond the region. That's what it's always gone after, from Georgia, taking Georgian territory, to what it's doing now in Ukraine. And in the end, the U.S. has always said, don't do it, don't go there, we will stop you, we will, fight on the side of what's right. And the U.S. always seems to lose in that respect. Russia does get what it wants.
But that's not the case. Look in the past year or 2 years, look at Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The governments that were elected there were overthrown after having consultations with Wagner-like groups or trainings in Moscow. Look at the Venezuelan dictatorship.
But that's just sending mercenaries. I mean, that's not truly what Russia's...
governments make changes.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Nicaragua, look at Cuba. I think we can look further. We can look at the cooperation in the international trade of arms, as well as the international trade of black market goods, where Russia does play a hand. The washing of illegal money that operates with drug cartels in Latin America. No, in fact, Russia does have a global imprint. And they say that it's local or regional is simply not the case.
The global imprint is one thing, but it's what it wants regionally is where it will take the more aggressive action. I mean, Vyacheslav, let me ask you if you think, Russians have said this many times before, that the United States often underestimates Russian power, influence, and its rate of success in its foreign interventions, if we can call it that. Is that what you're seeing now?
The United States have not any plan to conquer Russia, because what has happened in Ukraine, it is the efforts of the United States for domination, to keep domination. And that's why they refuse to accept Russian offer to conclude the agreement on national security guarantees in December 21. And I think that the best proof that Russia has no aggressive intention towards Ukraine is the agreement, the Istanbul agreement between Lavrov and Kuleba, who was foreign minister of the Ukraine, who signed presumably signed the agreement between Russia and Ukraine on keeping peace, on ending military action. Who was against this agreement? Peaceful agreement. Those who wanted domination. Boris Johnson, who was the prime minister, who was the first who refused to support or demanded from Zelensky to cancel this agreement and up to the full the end of Russia. And Blinken, State Secretary of the United States, supported him. So West, who wanted to destroy Russia, it's a view from the Russian side. And they accusing us for conquering Ukraine? No. I cannot agree with this, even as a citizen, as a Russian citizen.
Jason,
not
I
as
can
a political analyst.
I can see you weren't necessarily comfortable with that analysis, but please let me come back to Peter, because Peter, you were rolling your eyes even much earlier on. Go ahead, your response to.
I was just going to say, Andrea, we've engaged on your program with various representatives of the Russian government, whether acting or in retirement, and every time my head is about to explode, this topsy-turvy alternative reality world that they're trying to present. Well, the gentleman from Moscow just, when he talked about these Istanbul agreements, that's precisely the scenario that I described earlier. That would mean a severely curtailed sovereignty of Ukraine, sort of like what happened in Belarus. Ukraine does not want to be Belarus. Ukraine wants to be a European Union member. And that's what Russia cannot contemplate. It cannot contemplate a fellow Eastern Slavic people to have an alternative lifestyle. That presents, as Kremlin sees, a mortal danger when it comes to the realm of ideas. Of course, it's nonsense to say Ukraine ever presented a clear and present military danger to Russia. And the gentleman from Moscow is all of a sudden claiming that, the West is hell-bent on dominating Russia. Well, why did you go into Ukraine and create all these problems? Who started this whole process? I mean, let's not try to rewrite history. It's plain for all to see. Vladimir Putin, when he announced war on Ukraine on the 24th February 2022, opened that Pandora's box. That was his doing, and no one else's.
Let me just finish then with Jason quickly. We're down to our last few minutes. We have a harsh winter looming. It's already started. We have two populations that are getting very war-weary after over 1,000 days of conflict now. I would say both sides on the ground would like to get this over with as quickly as possible. The question is, how much worse does it have to get before it gets better? When we talk about Zelensky's new 10-point resilience plan, how much resilience can either side really have after almost 3 years?
Well, I'm sure that there can be quite a bit of resilience, to be frank, on both sides. I'm not really worried about the Ukrainian or Russian side. If you want to talk about the resilience to be able to continue, I'm sure both sides could if they wish to. I think what is much more probable to occur in the near term is the start of negotiations, which Donald Trump has put such an emphasis on. I think that is something that his administration is very interested to continue immediately. And so I think that's probably going to be the biggest game changer in this. But again, I think that Russia is doing itself no favors in this very short period of time before Trump takes office to have done so many things that show that they just don't care, they don't respect him. And I think they perhaps interpret this as showing strength. In fact, it's being interpreted quite the opposite. It's being interpreted in the United States as desperation, that the North Koreans have to come save the Russians. I mean, it's sort of funny. And imagine that any country would want to dominate Russia. I can't imagine something as absurd as that. I mean, have you seen what Russia looks like? Why would we want that? I don't know any country that would want to be occupying Russia. That's a joke. It's quite actually funny to hear the ambassador say that.
Peter, 30 seconds. How much resilience is really left, though?
People are worn out on both sides. Obviously, Ukrainians are, but I'll tell you this. Putin, once again, is up to his old tricks with these barrages of missile strikes and deaths of people. Sumy, Odessa, every time that happens, that brings back the resilience. That brings back the desire for vengeance. So we're in this spiral, and I agree with Jason. No side is willing to back down.
Okay. Not leaving it on the most optimistic note, but unfortunately that has been the trend of the last 1,001 days now. So unfortunately that'll have to be the last word for this edition of our program. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.